World News Now. U.S. President Donald Trump announces a trade deal with South Korea. Under that agreement, the U.S. will charge 15% tariff on imports from South Korea.
He also says that Korea committed to $100 billion in LNG purchases, with potentially more investment to be announced in days to come. And in exchange, Trump will then impose tariffs of just 15% on all Korean exports to the U.S., including on cars.
1 day to go. The latest deal that has been announced is the one with South Korea, as mentioned. Goods from that country will now face a 15% tariff, according to the administration.
In Washington, a quiet fear is spreading, one no one wants to speak aloud. South Korea, long considered one of America's most loyal allies in East Asia, may be drifting away for decades. Seoul stood firmly beside Washington, militarily, economically, strategically, forming a critical line of defense against both China's rise and North Korea's aggression. But now subtle signals suggest something has changed. Reports from Nikkei Asia and the Washington Post reveal a strategic shift, slow, deliberate, and largely hidden behind polite diplomatic smiles. Beneath the public pledges of friendship, cracks are beginning to form. South Korea is no longer moving in perfect harmony with U.S. interests, and Beijing has noticed. So the question is this: is South Korea simply pursuing a more independent foreign policy? Or is this the beginning of a seismic realignment, one that could shatter America's power in the Pacific? The first tremor appeared in the most unexpected place, a factory in Georgia. When Donald Trump reignited his hardline anti-immigration agenda, one of the first groups caught in the crossfire were dozens of South Korean engineers working legally at a Hyundai plant in the United States. What seemed like a domestic political move triggered an international backlash, one that would send shockwaves across Washington and Seoul.
300 South Korean workers touched down at Seoul's Incheon airport this afternoon to cheers, celebration, and certainly relief.
That factory had long stood as a symbol of trust between two nations, a fusion of Korean precision engineering and American industrial muscle. It wasn't just a workplace, it was a monument to alliance. Proof that democracies could build together, compete together, and prosper together. But that illusion shattered the moment Donald Trump branded Korean specialists at Hyundai foreigners stealing American jobs before ordering their deportation on live television. The blow wasn't economic, it was emotional. In Seoul, the message was received loud and clear. South Korea was no longer welcome on American soil. During a closed-door cabinet briefing, South Korea's industry minister admitted something unprecedented. After 30 years of joint ventures, for the first time, Koreans felt like outsiders in an alliance they helped build. Quietly, without speeches or press releases, a chill settled over Seoul-Washington relations. At first, U.S. officials scrambled to contain the fallout. They said the deportations were just domestic politics. Nothing personal, nothing against South Korea. Seoul, cautious and patient, accepted that explanation for a while. But then, everything changed. A new president entered the Blue House, Lee Jae-myung. And with him came a new doctrine: strategic independence. According to diplomatic sources cited by Reuters and Bloomberg, Lee's government opened discreet channels with Beijing. Publicly, these talks were framed as routine economic cooperation. But behind sealed conference rooms, they carried a far deeper message. South Korea would never, again, allow itself to be economically cornered by. Washington leaked memos from Seoul's foreign ministry revealed a series of secret meetings between South Korean and Chinese deputy ministers. Their agenda? A mutual insurance mechanism that would allow both countries to shield each other from economic damage caused by U.S. tariffs. In other words, a backup plan in case America turned hostile again. Then came something even bigger. According to information published in the South China Morning Post, Beijing proposed a strategic supply chain pact, a new alliance linking South Korea and China through shared production of semiconductors, critical minerals, and advanced battery systems, completely bypassing the United States. Experts at Singapore's Institute of Strategic Studies didn't mince their words. This wasn't economics, it was geopolitics. A quiet warning to Washington. South Korea is no longer a silent junior partner. President Lee made that crystal clear during an interview with JTBC when he said, "We are grateful to the United States for decades of partnership, but the era of unconditional dependence is over. Korea must protect its own interests. The statement hit Washington like a political earthquake. Within hours, Trump erupted on Truth Social, accusing Seoul of betrayal and threatening to pull U.S. troops off the Korean peninsula. But South Korea didn't flinch. In Seoul, major newspapers pushed back. The Korea Herald accused Trump of treating alliances like business deals. The Hankyoreh wrote that America no longer listened to allies. It issued ultimatums. And before the shock could settle, Bloomberg Asia revealed another jolt. A high-level South Korean delegation had traveled to Beijing, officially to attend an economic forum. Unofficially, they were exploring participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative. For Washington, this wasn't just competition, it was betrayal. Seoul had always been a central pillar of America's Indo-Pacific strategy, a democratic fortress positioned between China's rise and North Korea's rage. For decades, it was assumed South Korea would never waver. But those days are over. As Yonhap News later revealed, Seoul is now engaged in a delicate geopolitical balancing act, seeking economic gains from China without openly abandoning the U.S. alliance. One South Korean lawmaker summed it up with cold logic. If America imposes tariffs that choke our exports, and China offers open markets, what nation can afford to ignore the alternative? The breaking point came in early October. Donald Trump announced yet another wave of tariffs on China, set to take effect November 1st. Traditional U.S. allies like Japan and Australia quickly voiced support. But South Korea? It stayed silent. And silence in diplomacy speaks volumes. Instead of backing Washington, Seoul quietly sent a message to Beijing, not opposing China's stance. It wasn't an alliance shift, not yet, but according to analysts at Stratfor and the Rand Corporation, it signaled something far more dangerous to Washington. South Korea is preparing to redefine its place in the global order. Even former U.S. Ambassador to Seoul Mark Lippert issued a warning on CNN. China was once seen as a strategic threat. Now it's becoming a form of insurance against American. Unpredictability. He didn't stop there. Trump treats allies like clients, as if they can be replaced when inconvenient. And with trust eroding, Seoul began expanding its diplomatic reach, not just to China, but to Russia. According to the Financial Times, South Korean officials are exploring joint energy projects in Russia's Far East, something unthinkable just 5 years ago. But today, in a fractured world, the impossible is becoming strategic. Reality. Washington is watching with growing alarm. Members of U.S. Congress are now pushing for investigations into whether Seoul's new partnerships violate intelligence sharing agreements. Politico reports that the White House is even drafting new pressure tactics, including threats to reduce funding for joint U.S. Korea defense programs. But here's the irony. Every threat pushes South Korea further away. A Brookings Institution report warned that each U.S. ultimatum is accelerating Seoul's pivot toward Beijing. And beneath all the diplomacy, one powerful force is reshaping the future of the alliance: South Korean public opinion. Inside South Korea, a generational shift is underway. Young Koreans, raised in a high-tech economy, connected to global markets, have lost patience with U.S. trade threats and visa crackdowns. Many now believe economic survival requires balancing between Washington and Beijing. A Gallup Korea poll revealed a stunning shift. Nearly half of South Koreans now support a balanced foreign policy, not U.S. dependence. Universities host open debates on whether American protection still guarantees security or now creates volatility. TV debates openly ask, can Korea still trust the United States? According to The Economist, President Lee's administration is finalizing a 2030 strategic blueprint, one that redefines China not as a threat, but as a pragmatic economic partner. One key pillar of the plan? Reducing South Korea's vulnerability to U.S. sanctions and trade pressure. This is not just policy, it's a new national mindset. Across Asia, analysts now call this moment the Second Asian Drift. First, the Philippines began shifting toward Beijing. Now, many believe South Korea is next. The consequences for the United States are enormous. Politico Asia reports the Pentagon has already sent a discreet delegation to Seoul, officially to discuss military cooperation. But behind closed doors, their real mission was clear: stop South Korea from sliding into China's orbit. But as Professor Park of Korea University put it bluntly, America is not losing influence through war, it's losing it through arrogance, through policies that push allies away. South Korea's rise was fueled by U.S. support, but today, the world has changed. The United States has turned inward, obsessed with tariffs and trade wars. And in a world divided by economic conflict, Seoul is choosing survival. If partnering more closely with Beijing protects South Korean jobs and shields its industries from U.S. pressure, many in Seoul say that's not betrayal, it's self-defense. Across the United States, influential think tanks are sounding a warning. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, Atlantic Council, and Wilson Center all now agree on one reality. If Washington doesn't change course, South Korea could become the first U.S. ally to formally align with a new multipolar bloc, one that includes China, and Beijing is already preparing for that future. According to the Global Times, Chinese policymakers are drafting a proposal that would grant South Korea special economic partner status in new regional trade, frameworks, privileges normally reserved for strategic allies. Diplomatic sources at the United Nations confirm that preparations are underway for a quiet trilateral meeting between the foreign ministers of China, South Korea, and Russia. Their goal, to outline a new model of cooperation, economic, technological, and possibly even security coordination outside of U.S. influence. Washington is not blind to the shift. CNN reports that a congressional delegation is being sent to Seoul to clarify the American position. But inside South Korea, few believe this visit will change anything. Too much has already changed. The alliance, once bound by sacrifice and blood during the Korean War, now stands at a crossroads, tested by mistrust, shifting loyalties, and the hard truth of economic survival. That reality came into sharp focus this week. During President Donald Trump's Asia tour, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced that the long-awaited U.S.-South Korea trade deal, once billed as the next chapter of economic cooperation, would not be finalized. Speaking aboard Air Force One en route from Kuala Lumpur to Tokyo, Bessent described the deal as complex, insisting progress was still being made. But behind diplomatic language lay a simple truth. Both sides no longer see the world the same way. The agreement, first drafted in July, included a major U.S. concession, reducing tariffs on South Korean imports from 25% to 15%. In exchange, Seoul was expected to commit $350 billion in investment into American manufacturing and infrastructure. But negotiations stalled. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer revealed why. The deal wasn't just about tariffs. It covered technology sharing, national security clauses, energy cooperation, and access to the Korean market. Hidden inside were provisions designed to bind South Korea's strategic industries, shipbuilding, batteries, and semiconductors, to the U.S. economy. But Seoul hesitated. The world was changing, and South Korea refused to be locked into a one-sided deal. Greer admitted Washington was now urgently negotiating new shipbuilding investments, an effort to revive American naval manufacturing. President Trump called it a matter of national strength, and he made it clear America expects South Korea to help rebuild that strength. The two leaders are set to meet at the APEC summit in Busan, a symbolic battleground between old alliances and new realities. That summit will be followed immediately by Trump's private meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping, a meeting that could redefine global trade for years to come. Because right now, the U.S. and China are locked in the most intense economic confrontation of the century: heavy tariffs, export bans, technology embargoes. Together, they have shattered global supply chains and destabilized industries from microchips to electric vehicles. Port fees and retaliatory sanctions now stretch into the maritime sector. Washington recently imposed new fees targeting vessels linked to China, claiming the funds would revive U.S. shipyards. Beijing struck back within hours, hitting American cargo ships and even sanctioning subsidiaries of a South Korean shipbuilder tied to U.S. military contracts. Freight costs are rising. Insurance premiums are spiking. Global shipping routes are being redrawn in real time, and caught in the middle of this storm is South Korea.